Lord, thank you for allowing us to gather tonight, pray your hand of protection and guidance on this meeting, and especially for Bucky and Tom as they travel back to Atlanta. We also remember the Rump family and the loss of Taylor, and I pray that you be a comfort to them. Bless this time and give us your wisdom. I pray things in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, sir. You have the agenda before you. We have 2 items on there. We'll adopt this agenda by consent. All right. As a point of information and order, we have 3 new microphones up here which are designed to pick up the voices of all 5 of us during a regular meeting. So the 3 of us need to make sure we don't say anything we don't want recorded. Y'all are all right out there. Dr. Miller, you want to introduce our guests?
Yes, I would like to introduce Bucky Kinsey and Tom Owens. They're from Raymond James, and they have worked with for 20 years with the Lee County Board of Education. And I heard a story today about this process of, as we consider selling bonds and what all that involves. And I think they'll do a good job explaining how that works and what we need to consider as we look for renewal of the SPLOST in the November election. Gentlemen? Yes, wherever you feel comfortable. I thought that might be.
I feel comfortable.
Pretty informal.
Very long. What did you say?
Pretty informal.
Okay. Well, I'm Bucky Kinsey, and I'm with Raymond James and Associates in Atlanta. And I have been with Raymond James and the predecessor company, Morgan Keegan and Company, for 22 years now. And I think that the first bond issues that I did down here were 20 or 21 years ago. It has been a very long and wonderful relationship that we have had with y'all, and we appreciate it more than you know. Ms. Van's been here all the time that I've been here, and some of the other superintendents who I got to know was very meaningful to me. The relationship's been wonderful. We appreciate everything that y'all have done with us. I'm going to let Tom Owens talk about this handout that we have. I do want to just mention to you one thing. Gary and I have gotten to be real good friends over the years, and I appreciate him as much as anybody. I will tell you that we talk quite frequently, and not too terribly long ago, Gary called me at home, and he had my cell phone number and all this stuff. But and we started talking, and I had some surgery, and I've had several bits of surgery here recently, on my back and a knee replacement. And honestly, don't remember which one it was. But I was not doing well because my wife was off on a trip that I was supposed to have gone on to Europe, but I couldn't make it because I was hurt. So Gary calls me, and we talked he wanted to talk about some business, and finally I just said, listen, let me get Tom to call you back. I want Tom to call you back. And so Gary finally hung up, left me alone, and the next day I asked Tom, I said, did you talk to Gary? He said, yes, I talked to Gary. He said, we got things squared away. And by the way, Gary told me he thought that you might be on narcotics. And when I was talking to him, I said, well, I was. I took pills one a day for 3 days, and that was all I took. But I'm glad to tell y'all I'm drug free today, and I'm glad to be here with y'all. Appreciate y'all more than you know. Ms. Ford, it's very nice meeting you for the first time. You too. And I'm going to turn this over to Tom and let him.
I don't think I said narcotic.
On something. What did you say? Drugs?
Not drinking.
Oh, drinking. Okay.
All right. Well, following that, we've got a little presentation today that we'll just walk through, and this is a conversation. So where you have questions, interrupt or ask them, and that may be questions of your superintendent or of Gary, but. We just want to give everybody a chance to sort of learn a little bit about the SPLOST process and sort of see where you've been, what you have to do to get your new SPLOST put onto a ballot, and then also to help you make a decision whether or not bonds are an appropriate thing for the school district in conjunction with your sales tax election. If you will turn over to, I guess, the third page, one more. This is just a history of the sales tax in Lee County. The first sales tax was approved back in 1997, and so it was implemented on January 1st, 1998. You can see the sales tax that is run. You are currently in SPLOST 5, and this chart just shows you the collections you've had each and every year. And don't be fooled by that bar on 2020. That's just a half year, so that line would project out to be twice as big as it is. But the SPLOST we are talking about now would be SPLOST 6. A 5-year period on SPLOST 6 would run that. The SPLOST would go into effect after the current SPLOST starts. So you can never have two going simultaneously. You can have the one you're in, and then you can vote the renewal that gets queued up right behind it. So when the current SPLOST stops, this one would pick up, so it's not an additional penny. But it would start in the fall of 2022 and run through the fall of 2027 is the 5-year period that we're talking about. Turning over one more page, I think it's always good just to look back to see in that amount of time how much has the SPLOST produced in total, because it is generally a staggering figure. You can see the SPLOST in Lee County going all the way back to 1998 has produced $66.3 million for capital projects. And that's an important point, particularly if you haven't been through sales tax before. One of the questions we get is, why don't we do other things other than capital with SPLOST? And the reason is it's not permitted. SPLOST is only available for capital projects of the school district. So that's generally either buildings or the purchase of an item that you could, thrown out in the accounting term, but something that you could depreciate, something that would go on your books as a hard asset. The one thing that you don't see in this total is that often when you are building construction projects, you are able to leverage state capital outlay dollars. That's money that the state gives you for certain types of school facilities, either new or replacement, or maybe it's a replacement of some equipment or something like a roof. But you don't see that. A lot of times what you're doing is putting your local dollar together with those state dollars and completing the project. So, but again, this is mainly information, historical. $66 million is an awful lot of money that the taxpayers have not paid through property taxes towards your facilities. Turn over to page 5. When we are making projections, we always like to look at the most recent 12 months worth of collections. And so we just got the June, we just saw what the June check for this year was, and it was an excellent month for you. But when we're looking forward for a 12-month period, we're talking about the period that runs from July 2019 through this past June. So not a calendar year, but the most recent 12 months. And if you'll look, when we total that up, that's $3,490,000. And so turning over one more page, as we project that forward, a 0% growth rate is easy enough. If you had no change in your collections whatsoever, you would expect to collect a little more than $17.4 million during that 5-year period. And then you can see a few different ranges there. We do sort of, and these are annualized rates. So if you lost 2% every year, you would have about $15.8 million or so, all the way up to 6%, which would create, if you got that type of growth year over year, you would have $23.4 million. The reason that is important, and I'm going to talk about this on the very next slide, but we do have to set a collection cap. It's one of the things that you have to set when you're going out calling for a new referendum. So we may refer back to this page just to give you some different ideas, depending on what our cap is. We usually work backwards. We'll think of a dollar amount, and then we'll try to figure out about how much growth it would take to hit that cap. But our goal is always to make a cap that is reasonable but optimistic, because if you hit that cap early, your sales tax quits and you've got to go back through this process again. So we always want to try to set it high enough that the sales tax will run for a full 5-year period, but not so high that it's just an outrageous number that we have no hope of ever attaining. But turning over to page 7, and this is really some of the area where we need to focus. When you, will adopt your referendum resolution. There are a few requirements, the things that you have to put forward to the voters in order to have a complete referendum resolution. And there's some very basic things, like we have to tell them when we're gonna hold the election, obviously. You have to provide notice, and your attorneys, as well as your bond counsel, will put these notices together. So don't worry about really the top half here. But they're just a very basic thing. When's the last day for voters to register? And then what does the ballot question look like? And so down here at the bottom half, this is really sort of where the rubber meets the road in terms of the decisions for the board to make. One is, what are our projects? All right, we have to clearly identify these are the ways we intend to spend the money. In the past, what we have done is often you will have a couple of large items, and then we always make an effort to include what we call kitchen sink language. That's usually, you know, aside from a major project, we'll always try to include, if you have purchase of school buses, and then broad categories like technology, safety and security, just other types of equipment that would fall into broad categories but don't necessarily have to be specified down to we're buying 6 school buses. School buses is sufficient. But what you typically want to do is something that gives the voters enough information so that they know how you intend to use the money. We have to identify a maximum cost of the projects. That maximum cost will just coincide with the maximum collections. A maximum period of time, and again, these are the legal requirements. So the maximum period of time you're allowed is 5 years, which is 20 calendar quarters. And then if you have debt, we've got to do 2 important things. We've got to tell the voters how much principal will be repaid in each of the 5 years, or if you exceed 5 years, we'll talk about in a moment, that whatever the period of time the bonds is. But it's each year, how much money do you intend to repay on the debt? And then we have to set a maximum interest rate. What's the highest rate that we can possibly borrow at? So we know how much money, and we know how much the maximum interest rate can be. From that, you could, a voter could calculate out, well, these would be the maximum payments that we'll have on that debt. But those are the items that you really have to settle on. And Dr. Miller, I know that y'all are pretty far along in terms of projects. From a board perspective, do we need to have project discussion here, or do we want to?
Well, that's gonna go with what the board decides the option is
Okay.
that we wanna entertain.
All right.
So,
I just didn't know if that's the next portion of this is us moving into bond financing. Would y'all like to have some conversation about projects here? Do you want us to move through to?
I think we'll get bogged down.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
we'll move along to.
Can we,
Absolutely.
Can we, like, briefly, I don't wanna get bogged down, of course, but is there an easy way to highlight it
Well,
for me?
Well,
Is there an easy way to highlight the highlights, or?
Well, basically, right now, the highlights are Jim.
No, I know the projects.
Okay.
I'm talking about, he's talking about, you just mentioned bond rates, finance rates.
Yes, sir, we're gonna talk about
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, I thought you were skipping that.
No, we're moving right into that. I wanted to be sure we were all sort of, had a general idea
No,
of
the
what we're trying
projects,
to.
that's, to be determined.
Sure.
I'm fine.
All right, we'll just turn to page 9. Bucky and I are obviously bond underwriters, and so that's what we're here to talk to you about. We help you plan with SPLOST, and if you turn out not to need bonds, we'd be happy to help you plan your SPLOST anyway. But why do school districts borrow bonds? Almost every single school district in this state, I would say outside of a few of the very large ones, use bonds in some capacity. And there are a number of reasons for those, but the primary reasons are it takes a long time to accumulate enough money to do a project of any significance. If you'll think about your personal finance, if you tried to accumulate money to buy your house, it'd be mighty difficult, right? It's why people have mortgages. It allows me to build that house, have the use of that house, and make payments over time. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. It lets you take a priority project and complete it immediately. And so oftentimes you have competing needs, and think about if we put $1 from the SPLOST into that gym bucket, dollar into the bus bucket, dollar into the technology bucket, we'd have a bunch of half-filled buckets, right? One of the big ones, and I'm definitely gonna speak more about this, is construction inflation. We are in an extremely low interest rate environment, and one thing that's sort of an unknown, obviously, is the prices of your projects over time. We can't really predict that, but I'd make a bet that when you're borrowing at something sub 2%, it's gonna generally be less than the inflation on that project as we go forward. And I'll show you some historical information about that in just a minute. We've already touched on the state capital outlay program, low interest rates, but this is another big one. Building now for current students. If you think about this SPLOST referendum, you're gonna go put out a SPLOST referendum and think about the parent of a 8th grader or a 9th grader who goes to vote for a new gym. And by the time you accumulate that money and build that gym, my child has graduated from the school district. All right, that's as much as anything a reason to forward fund a project and get it done now, just so that you can show progress on the projects that are happening. And then I would, in today's environment, that earned interest by investing bond proceeds is not a great point, but in some environments, the school district, one of the things that is a benefit to you is you borrow on a tax exempt basis as a government, and so the investors in your bonds, when you pay interest to them, that money goes to them tax free, as opposed to a typical investment where whatever income you get from the investment is taxable. A break you get as a school district is that you are allowed to borrow at tax exempt interest rates. And since the investor doesn't have to take a portion of what they receive in interest and pay it out as taxes, they're willing to give you a lower interest rate generally than they would on a taxable investment. And so it's one of the reasons why you borrow with such extremely low rates, in addition to being a very good credit. But in certain environments, you can borrow at those tax exempt rates, and until you've spent those money, you can put that into taxable investments. So it's like a U.S. Treasury, and you can, in certain environments, again, earn about what it's costing you or more. That's not possible today, but it does highlight the fact that you're borrowing at tax exempt rates. If you'll look at slide 10, this is a history for not quite 15 years of school district construction inflation, school building construction inflation. This comes directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and if we average these years, in general, and this is nationwide, the cost of new school construction has increased at an average of 3.89%. If you were borrowing your bonds today, you'd be talking about interest rates in the range of 1.5%. And so these are round numbers, and I know you're not doing everything at once, but if you take $20 million worth of projects and let 1 year's inflation run at 3.89%, those projects increase by $778,000, right? As opposed to 1.5% interest on 20 million, which is about $300,000. And again, we don't know what will happen. The year I've got circled there, 2010, is the only year that you've seen really a pause or a negative in price increases, and that was following the last recession. So we're sort of optimistic that you're really hitting the construction program at a decent time. What we saw a decade ago was you had contractors who didn't want to lose crews and would price things, I don't want to say where they were losing money, but they were pricing buildings very efficiently, just so that they could keep their folks working. And I don't know what'll play out going forward here, but we're in an environment that's starting to feel a little bit, I wouldn't say it's as bad as it was a decade ago, but from construction, I would think that you're gonna see a little bit of a slowdown. Just the folks who have the means to go out and build big projects during this time, you may be on a short list, along with other school districts. But I would think you've got as good a shot as any to catch a project at a relatively low inflation environment. But if not, you can see how quickly you can chase your tail in terms of that project's always moving a little further away from you every year you put it off.
Best guess is how the markets may potentially react to administration change and fall. Any feeling? Just who knows?
I no idea. I think your interest rates, the Federal Reserve seems to be signaling that they intend to try to keep interest rates as low as possible. I think they only do that, low interest rates and inflation sort of drive one another, right? I mean, that's what the Federal Reserve typically does when they see inflation getting out of hand, is they raise interest rates. They make money more expensive for people to borrow and spend. And so, it's hard to say. I don't know what administration change does. I think in general, you may see, I would speculate that you would have a higher tax environment going forward, which is not really stimulative, but beyond that, who knows? I think you're seeing a tremendous amount of spending from the federal government to try to keep things afloat right now. And in the long term, that ends in inflation. I don't know what happens currently, but if that's this year, next year, 10 years, but it's hard to borrow your way out of the problem. Page 11. Sort of our preliminary discussions have been around a number of 20.1 million, maybe the amount that you may need in order to get your projects going. That is more than you can handle in one 5-year SPLOST cycle. It's just, the math simply doesn't allow for it, or it's very, very close, but you're collecting about 3.5 million times 5, that doesn't come up to 20. So what we have done, this is what we do a number of places when you run into this situation, is you can extend your bonds to multiple SPLOST. And I'm going to show you a list in just a moment of the school districts around the state who have used a similar program. This is what we call a step-down amortization. And so you have payments that project to be around $3.1 million for the first 5 years. And then what we can't amortize in that 5-year period, we step down and run it out over the next year 6 through 10 of your sales tax. So you see we're at about 3.1 million during the first 5 years, and during that second 5-year period, we project you to be at about 1,368,000, which is more specific than we need to be. But this is a good spot for me to make an important point about Raymond James and what we are to the school district. We are not a bank. And when you are borrowing bond money, you are not borrowing money from us. We are acting as your underwriter, so our job is to go find investors who will buy your bonds at the very lowest interest rates. But we're not, this isn't the rates go up, Tom and Bucky do better kind of a thing. Our interest is to try to get you the lowest rate possible, but we're not lending you our money directly. But it's important that you understand that, because when we talk interest rates, we try to be as conservative as we can at this stage. We want to show you rates that are realistic, but that have some cushion in them. This would work out when you average these rates to a rate of around 2.25% to 2.3%. That's got about 0.75% added to what the current market is. So you'd be much closer to 1.5%, if not below that, if we were doing this bond plan today. What we don't want to happen is you vote these bonds in November, we come back a year from now and interest rates have increased too much and this plan doesn't work anymore. So we generally add cushion to these bonds, and that's what we've done in this case, to try to give you a picture of what it would look like even if rates move the wrong direction a little bit for the school district's purposes.
How are bonds doing right now?
Well, in terms of interest rates are pretty well at historic lows. So if you were a bond investor and you owned bonds, that would be very positive for you. The prices of those bonds would have gone up. If you were buying bonds right now, you wouldn't be getting a whole lot for owning them. So it's sort of it depends on what seat you're sitting in at the moment, but they have performed well in terms of if you were an owner of bonds. I don't know that it's a particularly attractive time to buy more unless you think we're going to have negative interest rates or if rates are going to stay low for a very long period of time. But if rates went up, you would probably lose money in a long-term bond investment. So,
But typically the school bonds, they do sell
Your school bonds do great. Y'all are very good credit, and in addition to that, you get a free sort of backstop from the state of Georgia. Our veteran board members probably remember this, but you participate in something called the State Intercept Program, which is where the state says if you ever, because you don't have the means or just refuse to pay your bond payments, they would intercept your state aid that you get every month and pay to the bondholders until they're square, and then they'll work it out with you on the back end. That program has never been tripped in the history of the State Intercept Program. No one has ever actually drawn upon it, but it gives the bond investor a lot of security. Your bonds have a sales tax pledge towards their repayment, and then their underlying property tax bond as well. If sales tax didn't produce enough and the school district chose not to make up the difference out of just general fund, you could levy a tax at an unlimited amount if you needed to. Now, clearly we don't need to, but they're very, very secure from the investor standpoint. So that's why you get such great interest rates.
Tom,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Dr. Clay told me one time, he used to, you may know, but he used to have to fly to New York to meet with the underwriters, investors,
It was we used to go up there quite frequently to as a ratings trip. We don't do that much anymore, and but we would go up. We still do ratings. We don't have rating calls.
Yeah, y'all let this redneck from Alabama talk to that uppity person.
I've heard about that.
In fact, that's probably when we quit going. I think about it. But no, we basically just do that over the phone. And they come to
Part
us
of it,
at one.
they realized how expensive it was to keep all their folks in New York, and so some of the rating analysts are in Dallas, and some are in Washington, and some are in Chicago. You know, they're just not quite all in one spot like they used to be. So, what we like to do is bring them someplace, you know, try to get them to come see something local, which doesn't happen a lot, but I think I've made 2 rating trips in my career. But it's, if you turn over to page 12, this is what your bonds that would be outstanding during the period of the next splosh. You can see there's some yellow boxes. You have a series 2014 bond, which was a 20-year bond that was paid by property tax. And then you also have a series 2016 bond, which is not shown here because it's expected to be paid entirely from the current splosh that we're in. So this just layers these bonds right in the middle and kind of gives you a picture of what would be outstanding during the term of the next splosh. If you look at page 13, this is a list of all the school districts in the state that have borrowed splosh that take multiple terms to repay. A lot of times when we talk to folks about this, they think that everybody's able to do whatever they need to do within the 5-year splosh, and it's just not the case. And sometimes the case is we could do it in the 5-year splosh, but it wouldn't leave money for anything else, which is why you use this longer term program. But you got a lot of good company if you run into this, and of course everybody on this list has different circumstances. But you can see there's some very large systems on here. Vidalia City, Lowndes County. I mean, there's some spots that are big places that's even, still have more need than they have sales tax and need to work out a longer term program. So that's probably a good place for us to stop and just have a little discussion. The last slide we have will be a timetable and sort of the schedule we need to be on. But does anybody have any questions or anything there that gives you heartburn as far as that plan?
Anyone?
When you're talking about bonds, there's a dollar amount, but then there's also, service fees
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that. About what would we be talking about if we were, you know, if we were looking at the total package. I
Sure.
mean, Yeah,
So when you sell a bond, it depends on how they're sold. Something of this size would likely be a public offering. And so you will have what we call underwriter's discount, which is the way you compensate our firm, not say me and Bucky. That's the fee that's paid to Bucky and myself for structuring your bond issue, getting it ready to go to market. And embedded is that is also commission that we pay salesmen to go sell those bonds. That generally will be 1% or less. And then you can typically expect about another 1% that is legal fees. An attorney will write what would normally be known as a prospectus. In our world, it's called a preliminary official statement. But it's like if you were to buy a mutual fund or a share of stock, they give you a prospectus that told you all about the stock and explained the risk of the investment. There is you pay the rating agency for their rating, and then there's a few other costs. The bonds get a CUSIP number assigned to them. You pay a paying agent, which is the person who keeps track of the bondholders and takes your money each year and distributes it. They usually charge $1,000 a year or so as a flat fee. So generally 2% in total of the amount, the principal amount is generally a good rule of thumb for what you can expect. It rarely exceeds 2%.
2%.
Yes.
So it's 2%, and then you're saying another 1.5 to borrow the money is where it's at right now?
Yeah, so that's roughly what it would cost you if we were doing it today in terms of interest rate.
3.5%?
Well, no, the 2% would be one time upfront.
I want
So that's just the, what you pay. So you net out 98% roughly of the amount you borrow. And then ongoing it'd be about 1.5% is what the investors roughly would receive if we were doing this today.
So the
So
3.89 still by far exceeds.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we blend that in. It's sort of like a mortgage when you get a yield and you get an annual percentage rate, right? They quote you a rate, and then because there's some fees and things, it's the real cost of your mortgage is a little bit higher. We quote you both of those rates, so we'll show you a number that's your yield, and then we can also show you the all-in cost, and it usually on something this size, it'll raise it by, 10 basis points or so. So 150, once you embed the fees, is a 160. And that's, that's rough math. We can be precise about that, but you'll see both numbers. One of the important things to mention is that what you would seek in November is the voter's authorization to borrow up to that amount. You don't have to borrow it if you don't need it. You don't have to borrow all of the money if you don't need it. It's just a part. You don't have to issue it all at once. If you needed some now and some later, you can do it in multiple pieces. But it is important to know, you're not at this time committing to borrow money at unknown rates and with unknown costs. Does that make sense? We're going to come back to you at the time you plan to sell your bonds and say, this is the current market for your bonds. This is the fees associated with it. So at that time, you'll know exactly. It's not like today you're saying, well, if it passes, we're borrowing them regardless of the rate. You're going to know all of those details when we actually get around to selling the bonds. We'll come back and show you an itemized list of the cost as well as the detail on the, what the rates we're able to find with investors on that particular day.
And that 3.89, that's just an average, you're saying?
That's right.
I called this company JCI months ago, and it's a short of a recession, they plan on 5%.
Yeah.
And now we are.
I've generally heard rates closer to 5. I've never been able to find something that's hard information, but I do think, it depends on your project, depends on steel or asphalt or whatever you have. There are certainly elements that can be higher or lower than that number, and it probably depends on the makeup of your building to some degree. The concrete, just what kind of materials you have, and then labor.
Labor's huge.
Right.
There's such a shortage of skilled labor right now. It's really causing a significant increase locally.
And what were you saying, Frank, about the square foot, house per square foot? Didn't you tell me one time recently?
Well, in Lake County, if you get out in Quail Chase and in those areas out there, it's nothing to see 130, 150
schools are north of 200 though.
North of 200, my bad.
Yeah.
So I would like, I know there's nobody in this meeting in public, but it's gonna be on TV. I would like to hear you say that we're not wrong in saying, I mean, I had a bunch of people ask me, it's clearly better, more economical, and advantageous for us to borrow the money, go ahead and build the project, than to wait on it until we get it. Am I wrong in saying that?
I mean, it obviously depends on what happens to the price of your project.
Correct.
But, yes, historically, you would have been right making that decision. And the second part of that you don't have a dollar figure for, and you'll never put a dollar figure on, is the fact that you put a child into a newer facility 3 or 4 years earlier.
That if you waited
Right.
5 years, 10 years from now to build, you
Correct.
probably would have already, it may already be too
Then,
small.
you know, you can't hang a dollar number on the fact that we've been using this building for 3 years.
Correct.
Right, I mean, that's the other part that's unknown. But yes, generally speaking, I would wager that you're borrowing at less, at a lower rate than, the slower, the borrowing is costing you less than the price of that.
The
building
inflation
increase.
would be if you were to
Absolutely.
wait and build it 5, 10 years from now.
Historically, other than 1 year, you've been right.
I mean, with what money's earning, let's say you took a pay-as-you-go option, the gap's so big.
Right.
Because there's not anything you can earn a good interest rate on to build that balance that much.
I think 10-year treasury was 70 basis points last week. And you can't buy a 10-year treasury because you're gonna need the money inside of 10 years, so,
Trey, the first project, I was hired in '97, which was when SPLOST began. And I was asked a question about doing bonds or not. And, I looked at the interest, the money that we were gonna be giving up in interest for bonds. And I recommended that we did not do the bond. So, everybody wanted to know when we're gonna build that middle school. So 3 years into collecting money for the middle school, I'm getting pressure to build a school. When can we do it? And I'm getting with Greg Smith on the cost analysis. When's the contractor gonna bill me for the materials? When's he gonna do this? So we went out and actually bid the project before all the money was collected, hoping that I would have the money as the bills came due. And at that point, I said, never again, it's worthwhile to sell the bonds and have the money up front. And you don't have to worry about the collection of the stuff. So if you're willing to wait 4 years to build the project, then yeah, avoid the interest, but other than the cost of living increase. But I mean, these people are voting the project and they want it now. I mean.
Well, I feel like, I haven't heard it, other than I've heard some people say, you shouldn't buy anything until you have the money in your pocket. I am not of that mentality. I'm of the mentality, borrow the cheaper way is the best way, but also you do get to use it. If I wait to save up for that Lamborghini 10 years or 20 years it takes me to buy it, it's not gonna cost, it's gonna cost way more than it cost when I started saving. And I get to use it.
And you
know
get
what
all that pleasure.
I just feel like, I had, being on this board, I had a bunch of calls about,
right.
Don't spend it till you have it, and I just like it stated that that's not the best decision with the taxpayer's dollar, in my opinion.
Well, and the other thing is, we have sales tax in this state that produces a tremendous amount of money for projects. And when we talk to our colleagues who work in different states, they have no idea why we pay for, 40, 50-year buildings with 5-year money.
Mm-hmm.
To some extent, we have our taxpayers today pay for the full price of something that everybody uses for a mighty long time, which is great, you save some interest. But, other places, they have no problem with paying for a school building over 30 years because it's in use for 30 years. Now, we're certainly not suggesting that, but, the notion that going beyond 5 even is is strange.
Yeah.
Is strange locally.
Strange here.
But it is strange in Alabama or North Carolina or Tennessee, because we're so fortunate to have SPLOST.
Mm-hmm.
It's done more for educational facilities in this state than anything else. But I think you're exactly on the right track. It's just, there are unknowns, which is inflation,
Correct.
right? But the right bet historically is build the thing, and, I mean, the only way you eliminate inflation is to get those contracts let and start building. You know, and what we know is the cost of funds. When we know you're borrowing at a really cheap rate, it's been, in my experience, it's rare that something gets cheaper over time. You know, and it's not a bad bet that it's gonna be only 1.5% more expensive. I mean, you know, that, the lower interest rates are, the lower that bar is to get over, right? I mean, it's 1.5% inflation, not much. So
But we
yes,
have
think
time. I
math
mean,
is-
there is an unknown right now. We are in a pandemic. I mean, we hadn't seen the outcome.
Right.
But still, I mean, I still at 1.5% don't think it would, I still think we would see.
Well, in the middle of that pandemic, we had the biggest collection we've ever had.
Yeah, I saw it. But how much, okay, so in 2010, construction inflation costs were what? Zero last, what were they? I mean.
Yeah, they were less, but think about it this way, right? Suppose you see that next year, right? We got a project that's been on the drawing board, and it gets cheaper next year. Without bonds, how are you gonna start?
I agree.
Right? I mean, you don't have any
No,
way to say, hey, well, it got cheaper, let's call the contractor, you know? I mean, that's the other thing about it, is it gives you the option, if things are favorable, to get going.
Yeah, I see you in the
Right.
driver's seat because you just
Right.
rebid it and it could get cheaper and you already have the money to roll.
But
Right.
also the opposite is true. If you write this thing right and it goes the other way, you can always put the brakes and divert. If you've written it
Sure.
broad enough, you can divert and push it elsewhere if you needed to. I mean, if you hadn't gotten that far into the project.
Right, now there's some case law that says, you know, you have to build what you tell the voter you're gonna build.
But when do you have to do
But,
it?
right, but it can be
But I mean,
delayed, that's
you know,
right.
if
I
your
mean,
option, everything went south and you need to
Right.
divert it to, say, the other general obligation, if you've written it
Right.
right, you can shift it to.
right. And you know, that's right, the sales tax, that's right. I mean, you know, it's hard to outright just say, we're gonna build a gym, you all voted
Yeah.
for it, now we're not gonna build it. You know, that, that's a tougher argument, but you're right, I mean, you have more flexibility in terms of where you can put different projects. That's exactly right. Would it be helpful just to talk through the calendar here? That's the next to last page, which is slide 14. You are here in these early stages, finalizing your projects, figuring out cost. There is a very, very preliminary referendum resolution, but like I said, the basics of it are known. You know, all those things we talked about, what day is the election, you know, when's the last day to register, et cetera. What we have to finalize is, are you gonna have bonds? What's the amount of those bonds? You know, those things at the bottom of that page that we ought to figure out. Those go in the referendum resolution, but the fuse is lit on this thing. In a year where there's a statewide election, which the presidential election is a statewide election, you have to call the election 90 days beforehand. And so that referendum resolution has to be passed before August the 3rd. And we generally recommend that, you know, don't wait till August the 2nd either. So that puts you really in July in terms of getting a referendum resolution adopted if you're gonna be on the November ballot. You'll see in here, there are 5 election notices that get posted in the paper. Those will be taken care of. But each of the weeks, 5 weeks leading up to the election, so a copy of that ballot question is gonna be put in your local paper. Then you'll, of course, hold the election in November. But that's basically where we are, and why we're here to talk to you tonight is because, you know, the month of July is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of getting the sales tax on the November ballot.
That's not the deadline to determine whether or not we're gonna borrow money.
No, sir. That's purely the deadline for having your finalized referendum resolution, getting it passed here so that you can get it to the ballot builders who have to put the machines, you know, in order to call the election in November.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's soon.
Yes, ma'am.
Next week is July, right?
Yes.
No, this week.
This week is
This
July.
We started down this path.
Yes. Oh,
Right, but we started down this path,
Back in January. I
yes,
got
and
notes,
we
yeah.
have a little diversion here, so.
Our bond attorney has these projects already, so
Oh, good,
if the
okay.
projects are gonna change, we need to.
Do it.
Right. I mean, that document's in pretty good shape. I mean, it's very similar to what you've used in the past. It's managed to substituting projects and some dates.
Pretty much. I can't see it.
Yeah. One other thing is the maximum interest rate on the bonds. And this is sort of this concept can be a little confusing, but we will typically put something like a 6% rate in that resolution, which is concerning on its face when you hear that. The reason is bonds typically trade with round face amounts in terms of the interest rate. So an investor may buy a 2% or a 3% or a 4% or 5% coupon. A 5% rate on the bond is not unusual, but they'll pay you way more than face value when you get that bond. That means they may pay you 120 cents on the dollar to sort of buy that rate up a little bit. And in exchange, the actual return to that investor is much lower, and the cost to you is lower if we're able to give them exactly what they're after. And so you end up maybe even borrowing less than the face value. You pay the percentage fees based off of that face value. And we'll talk more about that later, but I don't want you to see a 5 to 6% rate in that referendum resolution and think that means you're borrowing money at 5 or 6%. It's just it's a marketing function of the bonds that you may issue.
Basically, there's a premium.
It's bond premium is exactly what it is. And you can even see on that schedule of bonds you have outstanding, you know, there's a number of 3 and 4% coupons there. So it's exactly what it is. It's bond premium. That's just foreign to most folks. But we want to allow to sell the right type of bonds to get you the lowest cost of money that we can. So I don't want you to see a 6% number in there and think that's what your money's going to cost you. That's not at all reality.
All right, any other questions? Tom? Buck? Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Well, like Bucky said, we really appreciate not only being here, but being invited back for many, many years. If anything comes up, both of our numbers are on the front of here. If y'all have any questions after the meeting, strike you on the way home, let us know. We'd be happy to try to answer.
You gonna drive them back right now?
Yes,
Bless your heart.
they gotta be back.
Hey, I've heard back from, the boat. That makes for a time.
All right.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much. We appreciate y'all's time, and, if y'all have any questions, let us know.
Thank you.
Telling him he did a great job, I ain't telling you.
You did, Tom, that was
Man,
good.
thank you very much. I'm just smart enough to have him, work with me.
All right.
I'm not gonna go shake everybody's hand. I just wanna tell y'all we appreciate it very, very much. Thank y'all. Good to see you.
Thank you, Buck. Tom, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry I
Thank
didn't
you
have a
all.
chance to speak to you. It was good to see you.
My boss is going out and I'm trying to make sure Fannie Mae's pleased next week.
All right, the next item on the agenda is an executive session. I will entertain a motion that we do that.
Can we say something?
Well,
Really enjoyed it.
Pumpkin.
Yeah.
I love you, Bucky. Bye.
All right, yes, ma'am.
Trey's question, or some of the phone calls that you received, seem to kind of be, questioning, do we need to put money away in order to do these capital projects? And I understand what you're saying. I wondered at this point if we kind of, I talked to Gary today, if we kind of made sure that they understood where we were with everything. I felt better just because, the SPLOST is going to retire, one of our capital outlay projects. I don't know if voters know that. And then, as the SPLOST continues, through 2034, and the general obligation bond, it will retire the other one, but I kind of feel like people would feel better if we kind of questions.
Mhm.
And you see the facilities that we have built, you know, the football complex and the tennis courts and the track and the soccer field. But there are complexes that we have built and I can see them having questions. So if we kind of somehow put it in the ledger or, you know,
A schedule of the outcome.
somewhere,
Yeah.
so we are
I
kind
totally
of
agree.
Sure.
explaining to them, and then they will understand where we're going next.
Right.
Because I'm not sure they know where we are, so they don't know how we're going to get the current debt paid off to be able to go into, you know, additional, you know, funds that we need to complete projects at the primary school, the gym, you know, those kind of things. But, you know, I think Gary could just do a great job of explaining that. But anyway, it helped me to understand everything. So I really understand where your questions are coming from.
Sure.
Well, I totally agree, because I didn't know either. I mean, all these people were contacting me, I'm the new guy, and they're like, hey, you need to stop them from building this gym and wait till we get the money for it. But as a business owner, I didn't know anything, this is all new to me. So I just picked up the phone, because we met these guys at that convention. I called, I said, I asked for the estimator, and I said, hey, you know, what would it cost to build this gym in 10 years or 5 years if we had the money? And he said, you expect 25% increase in cost. I'm thinking, so it's gonna cost 25% more, because 5% a year inflation, and we don't get to use it. And probably the plan we have in 5 years will probably already need a bigger one. I'm just guessing, you know, some of the growth. So it was simple for me to see that, but I don't think the average person, unless it is written in an article, would get it either.
And you're on the board, you're listening,
Mhm.
so we have a general understanding. But,
Right.
you know, I'm not sure that everybody else does, so
I completely agree.
I appreciate the questions.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, that we can help them kind of see where we are and where we're going.
I completely agree.
I think we go back to and highlight the fact that right before I came on, when the elementary school was complete, that was the focus of the prior SPOS had been to get the academic facilities updated and to handle the student volume. And kind of the next plan was to go to some of the other outside extracurricular facilities that needed to be updated and brought current to handle student loads too, and kind of give a history of where we are with that also.
Well, I think there's some component, like you said, I remember we were focused on academics, and then we had a SPOS, and then we said, well, this is gonna be our quality of life SPOS
Yeah,
over here.
that was-
We're gonna focus on those things that really impact the Lee County quality of life, and there's always been something that has come into that next SPOS that became a necessity. But I think in this particular SPOS, the one we're talking about now, we finally reached that point where it is, in a sense, a necessity, where there's that gymnasium. But then we also have the roof project at
Okay,
KPS or the remodel at Lee Primary. That's a necessity, that has to be done. So, yeah, communicating that effectively is the best course of action. Now, we're giving ammunition to a significant number of naysayers that no matter what you say, and trust me, I face this every day, interest and fees are short of gifts from the devil, okay? I mean, in the eyes of a lot of people. But when you look at what it saves us in the long run as it relates to inflation, I can tell you, I think interest rates are gonna move in our favor. I'm knock on wood. I wouldn't be surprised if we had an opportunity for some even lower rates, but I don't know that. That's yet to be determined. The question before us and we put before voters is whether or not we want 1% tax. And then we'll decide after that whether we wanna borrow money to start it off and get moving. But, there are some out there that will use the information we put out there against us, but I think the vast majority of the voters are in support of the system and trust us to do what's best, and putting that information out there will calm a lot of those questions that you're getting.
I mean, I feel better seeing the list of all the schools that utilize this, because I mean, the vast majority of the systems in the state have
I'd like to say something too, and it's,
Go right ahead.
you asked me a question today, and I'm in the middle of closing out, getting the budget, and I mean, we're right now in the middle of it, but the question you asked me, she asked, about would we have any money left over in this SPOS. So I took our cash on hand and what we owe in the current SPOS for the payout, and we need to average $229,000 a month to make the payout. We're about $300,000. Hopefully, we're gonna be able to do the bus yard in this SPOS because it was in that SPOS, and we won't have to carry that over into the next one.
So what is our list of plus projects that?
Right now,
Right now?
or for the next one?
Because I don't know that we as a board have approved an official list yet. have
We've had a.
We have
a
our
list.
official
we? We have a
list.
general concept of what we would like to,
We did that at a board agenda, but I mean, it was just a board retreat.
yeah.
But no, we really, what I presented to Blake basically is the primary school renovation. And now Greg's got that in there at $8 million. I really think it's gonna be closer to 6, and then you state funds, bring it down to about 4. Then the gym, we put buses in there in case we have to buy buses. We've got the bus parking lot, but I think we're gonna be able to do that without that. There's some other parking, we always do safety equipment, technology and stuff like that. But those 2 projects are the 2 biggest projects. So if you've got another one, I mean,
We talked also about a portico at Twin Oaks on the gym, to cover where it's flooding back in the door, on that outside door of the gymnasium. And we discussed the pre-K playground and also upgrading equipment here at Butterfly Kisses, which now, belongs to the school system, even though it's basically a public park. We need to look at upgrading that equipment.
Pre-K uses
And
it
then,
all.
of course, paving is always on there. We really need to look at that at the high school, that back parking lot, which might, I guess, if we did build a gym, could be tied into that project.
We have baseball facilities.
A baseball,
How do you
yes.
word- I was gonna ask, how do you word in the smaller projects like the softball, baseball?
renovations and stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of a broad
You
term.
put
What about
renovations in there, okay.
What about the security cameras? Cause I still think that could be a real plus as far as recording teachers, particularly if we have to go to
We've got-
virtual. I mean, or is it-
Well, what she's speaking of is a system where you have a camera in every classroom. That'd be about $3 million when we looked at it a couple of years ago to do that, but that's.
That was
certainly
just on
something.
the list, and I wondered if it was add security. Now, y'all talking about just straight security cameras and not,
As long as, I mean,
or
like
you
if you're,
just,
if you're,
you word it broadly to where you could
You
go in and
do,
pick up some of that.
but now, like if you're gonna build a new football stadium,
It has to be.
that needs to
very
be out there.
separate,
But if we're
yes.
gonna renovate an existing facility, you can put that in the broadest sense of renovation of existing facilities and stuff like that, upgrades and stuff. He's got verbiage for that, but I mean, really, if you're talking like a project that's gonna be $2 to $4 million, you need
Plus
to,
use.
you need to itemize that out.
Here's my concern with the gymnasium. Quite honestly, I'm not debating whether or not we need a gymnasium. I have a huge question in my mind as to whether or not we can afford the gymnasium that we need. I've heard figures thrown out there at $12 to $13 million. And that was really not everything in there. If you wind up putting everything in there that we need to service today, I think you're closer to 20, 18 to 20. That's just rough, that's just frank, okay?
Yeah.
Then I begin to question the wisdom of using up all of this project for that. So as long as we've got a list of projects that we can reasonably encompass using the vast majority of this money so we don't find ourselves in an issue without building a gymnasium, I think I can be okay. But I could not vote right now if our sole purpose was for building that gymnasium, out of fear that we would put a Band-Aid on what our needs are. I personally would rather see us have a special general obligation bond specifically for a gymnasium if we found out we needed that. But that's way down the road too.
So will you say scratch that
No, I'm not
altogether?
saying take it off. I'm not saying take it off, but I'm saying as long as we got enough other projects in there.
I I still wanna tell Greg, Steve, and Floyd and get a good number. Tell him, these are the things we want to see in the gym. Give us the.
I would like to
want
see
it- I
that.
want a good number.
I don't think
I want it on that
we
and
don't
the primary.
have that much time for this, so to get, in order to vote
Sure,
for
they
this.
built some before that are like to what we
He's
were
got
doing,
it.
they could
He's
throw
got
it
it.
off.
I think we can have Greg
Then a
speak
plus
to
or
the board
minus.
and give us an
I mean, I
idea.
think he can throw some gym costs that he's built with some stuff in it really quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'd say, hey, that's what we need. Cause I look at the gym as more than a gym. I look at the gym as an academic and an athletic facility built, because I feel that it's, from what I heard these teachers say, and you can add classrooms to it and places like that too. I agree, but then we're sitting here talking about a 5-year and then a 10-year, and you're looking at this sheet right here, and I see schools that are 25, 40, 20 years, 25 years. I mean,
They
have
built
y'all
a high
not thought
school.
of building the gym?
They built a high school, probably.
High school?
Right.
Yeah, what was that, one of our, $110 million?
It was, 90 million. The high, the last high school.
Yeah, so, I guess that's just my biggest concern right now. To make sure we have enough on the list that if we did make the decision that it was not time for us to build a gym, that we were okay.
But we would just not sell those bonds. I mean, but what's gonna happen then is you're gonna have a lot of money coming in, and you haven't identified a major project. And I agree with you. You don't wanna go out there and not build what you need.
Right, so I guess if we wrote in there, I hate to say this out loud, because I feel like our general obligation debt that we have is at a relatively low cost of funding, okay? But if we had written in there that we could potentially pay off other debt with that money,
Debt service.
Yeah, you could do that.
that would take care of that.
It is in there, isn't it? Yeah.
It was in
That's
the
why-
last
And
slide.
not pigeonhole us into
Listen,
That's why I
building a
asked,
gym.
that's why I asked the question, let's just say everything went completely unfavorable and you needed to put the brakes on that. You write it to where you could divert the money.
Yeah, because my concern is not so much about the gym as it was that, I remember you made a statement that if we built the gym and you might get one other project, the roof, and that was it.
Right.
And I didn't like that.
It would be the
I was worried
renovation of
about
the
that.
primary, and that's a
That's
big
the
project.
that's the renovation of Lee Primary would be
So
the
I
first
would
priority.
hate to see everything else on that list get cut just for a gym.
The,
But that's
what I would-
why we
Correct,
talked
correct.
about.
the other thing I want.
And that's why I'm in favor of that method more so.
The other thing I wanna make sure we don't, if we carry this across too, that we don't handicap the next SPOS in case there were some. That's kinda what I wanna do too, is also identify things maybe out there 8 to 10 years later, that they might need a good chunk of money to cover.
Well, we had a preliminary discussion with an architect and, I do not have my notes in front of me. What I recall from that meeting was that this would not take up the whole next SPOS. To be able to do all the projects we wanna do, including the gym, there would be room in the, not SPOS 6, but SPOS 7. It wouldn't tie the hands of that board or that
If I'm
superintendent.
thinking wrong, you'd probably still have about 14 million in 7, 13, 14 open maybe.
But I want y'all to remember that last year we made a transfer into capital projects. And right now I suggest that we hold on to that till we see what happens with the COVID, and next year's budget and stuff. The money, what the legislature sent us in state funds, with what we saved last year from not having school, we're gonna be fine. We're not gonna have any furlough days. So it looks good right now, but I wanna see what the next year's budget is before we let go of those capital outlay funds. And so you've got almost $2 million over there to pick up some of those other projects. So-
Like the parking lot, but we also have the school year starting and what did you say, $5,700 a day for
Yeah.
Mask.
for mask?
Yeah.
We wanna be in position if we need to do something for the safety of our students and staff that we can do that. There's a lot of options out there, a lot of considerations that we're working through right now. And we wanna be good stewards of the money, but we also wanna ensure the safety of our students and staff, and that may require us to do some things there.
How is baseball renovations or baseball described in that?
What we do is athletic facility renovations is basically a term, I mean, like that, and that would cover your softball, that would cover your, and also, I don't know when that turf field's gonna run out. I mean, it's got a 10-year life, so I think that needs to be in there,
Sure.
In case.
so.
So,
Yeah,
but
we
student
could.
safety, school safety is listed as a line item in that list as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, but now here's a SPOS 5 but with figures. You gave us figures before.
Yeah, I had a lot more information back then. That was a lot easier to do than a gym.
Yeah.
And like you say, if we want a 40,000 square foot gym, 50,000 square foot, or 60,000, I mean, that's, and you go 5,000 in between, but that's gonna dictate, you know, where we are in the gym.
But it also dictates what we do with the facilities that relates to parking and other facilities. I mean, it morphs into a massive project.
Sure.
Very quickly. I mean, it morphs into
If we hit
a massive.
the mark.
But
Okay, now the second is what we
we,
can
we've
tear down.
expanded every area of that high school.
Yeah, okay.
We've added classrooms, we expanded the cafeteria, media center, band. And so this would be when that school opened in '92, Sylvia and I were teaching then, and we that next year, I think, added what is now the 700 hall. It was 4 classrooms when the school opened. They added, the board at that time added 16 classrooms, an office, and a set of boys and girls restrooms. And that was right after it opened to accommodate the growth. And now we moved the 9th grade out to help us there, but we have the same gym that we had at that time. So
Yeah, the gymnasium was too small then.
yes. So that,
Okay.
and it's,
How about
and
this
it's,
one with
when you
JCI?
think about it,
Got
Dr. Neal and I were talking about this the other day, there's no, that I know of, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's any place in Lee County that can seat more than 900 people
So,
indoors.
that was my last question. You know,
So, and maybe First Baptist Albany, I don't know, that's a pretty good sized facility, but I don't think there's a, indoor facility capable of seating that many people. And I see it as a community investment, not just for the schools, but for all of Lee County. And we could certainly
Well, that's what I was gonna
look at things like a walking track that might be something that would benefit the public. I know our tracks are used all the time.
Again, I'm not debating the need. I'm not debating the need at all. It's just a matter of we have a bunch of other needs too. And when you start saying we're gonna spend 12, 15, whatever $1 million on the gym, all the other needs go to the wayside. That's where, I like talking about, explaining it to the voters. I can explain that to the voters. And if the voters decided after we did all this other list of projects that, hey, we wanna come back and here's the Mac Daddy Gymnasium Complex that we wanna pay for with this special purpose, I can sell that too if we have to, if that's what the need is and when we wanna do it. So, as long as we got this one written to where we have flexibility that
I got you.
gives us the best ability to make the best decisions, I'm good.
I'm making that call tomorrow.
That too, and I think you need to really sit down and prioritize and rank those needs and schedule it out and look at it, so
Well,
we
remember
can
we
be
cut like
confident.
300 seats from the auditorium at the high school, and we need it now?
What I'm
Cut
hearing,
that, it was in the plans, but we felt like we had to keep on cutting, keep on cutting. Well, I didn't want to cut.
That was before SPOS.
Was it? Okay.
Yes, Dr. Clay built that high school was built before we had a SPOS. I'm assuming it's a general obligation bond.
And they
And
kept cutting and
so,
kept cutting.
you know, he did not enjoy the benefit that we have with the SPOS. And certainly we'll prioritize the projects. Lee Primary has to be, I think if we do that project well, it will last us another 30, what year did it open? This for? 86, so it's 35-year-old school that hopefully it will last us another 30, 40 years, and it'll be much less costly than building a new Lee Primary by many millions of dollars. So we feel like we've extended the life of the high school with the remodeling there. Kinchifuni certainly is now, 25 years old, and we think we can get a lot more years at a lower cost by making some strategic investments with the board's approval and certainly the voters. We have to count the costs, as the saying goes.
So let me restate what I've heard you say, that basically if we can't do the gym, we want to be able to take that money and recall the bonds that's out there, the general obligation bonds that we already have existing, and then we go back to the voters with another general obligation bond. So I mean, I think because we need to pay, we would have to use that money for some purpose. Yeah.
That's one line item of possibility. There needs to be the other projects in there that are needs.
Okay.
That get us close to that figure.
Okay.
Anyway, I think the voters in Lee County vote for that SPOS for education purposes typically. And they trust us as their elected officials to make the best use of that dollar. Yes, we're operating within the confines of what legislation requires us to present to the voters with every SPOS. But in general, they trust that we have the
I agree.
best, interest in mind. So. Okay. Any other questions about this before we move on to our executive session? All right. I entertain a motion then that we move into executive session. The purpose of this motion would be to discuss the deliberative on the employment, compensation, hiring, disciplinary action, dismissal, or periodic evaluation or rating of a public officer or employee, or to interview applicants for the position of superintendent. Do I hear a motion of such?
So moved.
Have a motion?
We don't have to repeat it,
Right. That's why I read it out, because I'm the only one that's got the copy. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we will not take up